Hey guys, Luton here, back for some more Below the Line. This series is out every Wednesday, and this is a series where I post a discussion topic. You tell me what you think down below, and then next week we look at your discussion comments in the video. This week we'll be looking at Squad, and then we're going to be talking about last week's look at Subnautica and is it a finished game. So first up, discussion topic for the day. Is Squad one of the few FPS games in recent memory to get it right? Now yes, it's been in development for some time, 2 years really, and it leans more towards a military simulation than an arcade shooter, and it's still not finished, but it provides a very accessible platform for people who want something a bit more serious. Insurgency Sandstorm is coming up as well, and that might be a crossover middle ground between a more sim and arcade style hardcore shooter. Other games like Hell Let Loose and Postscriptum are throwing into the ring as well. I'm not including armor in this because its general accessibility and performance don't really match up with the other games that we're comparing here. Simply, what does Squad get right though? When we compare it to other AAA titles, and I'm going to pick like Battlefield, which is by any description now truly a casual arcade shooter, having long driven out any kind of serious player base. But let's cherry pick some details and see what you guys think. So for one, let's talk about class limitations. Now Squad, it limits your class options, and this is something I've suggested for a long time, could be really interesting in Battlefield. Never imagine it's going to happen, but Battlefield of course allows a free reign. This has become an endlessly annoying issue in Battlefield because people often complain about teams of snipers. This is never literally true of course, but the imbalance of class does often help dictate how that gameplay flows. In Squad, because of the class restrictions, not only does it mean people feel more likely to team up and work together, it also helps balance the gear across the teams, giving a more even feel to the combat. Now second, Squad utilizes a genuinely good and simple in-game comm system, using local squad and command chat to speak to your team. It's a very easy system and enables a solid underpinning and execution of just some rough coordination. Now in a more arcade game like Battlefield, you'd never expect to see anything like that sort of team execution of orders, but with some simple changes it definitely could happen a little bit. Just think about how little you get any kind of team coordination in AAA shooters. If they were to add more, for example, easily identifiable squad markers on the map so you can actually see squad 1's going here, 2, 3, 4, which is what they have in Squad. That means that then those squads can look at those guys and go, okay, I want these guys to go here or these guys to go there. Maybe having just a separate channel for squad leaders only, as you do in Squad, so that you could say like, hey Bravo, we're capping D, you guys head to C. That's pretty much a lot of the time all you need, and those kind of simple chats could have a big impact as they do in Squad. Now at the same time, you don't want to take anything away from Squad. You don't want to be like, oh yeah, you guys came up with a good idea, we're going to just take that and put it into everything. You don't want to do that, but at the same time a good idea is a good idea, and if it works in one it can work in another. If you just take a very simple concept and then apply it to others, it's like that kind of thing could be very interesting. It would be curious to see just how it would play out, whether it would have any impact whatsoever. But it is just an example of something that Squad has come up with that they do right, and it works very, very well. Now another thing, being able to spawn on a limited rally point, for example, instead of directly on anybody in your squad or at a set spawn location, makes a huge impact on people's attitude to being a squad leader. You're not only working to try and direct your guys, you're also choosing places where you want them to spawn in and safely. On top of that, the limited spawn mechanic makes you constantly think of having to redeploy it, not just choose a sneaky location and then leave it there indefinitely. Many AAA titles have never really experimented beyond either the default random spawning mechanic or spawn on squad members. This approach to spawning is inevitably flawed in its either randomness or bringing people back into the action right in the middle of everything. It often leads to a more chaotic feel of game flow, as opposed to something like Squad, which feels much more directed and focused. It's just another example of something done right with actual logical thought. Now one other thing that does also apply to armor, and a bit of a more contentious point, the lack of a progression system, or less a lack of, more a chosen exclusion of a progression system. Now these systems are clearly something that arcade games excel at. Double XP weekends, special assignments to unlock X gun, and of course the ever-present DLC pack. It would be very naive to imagine that these are going to disappear anytime soon in your big titles. It is worth though just noting how distracting, disruptive and generally unbalancing these systems are. For one, a progression system is by its very nature tending to assume that in order for it to actually progress, each unlock should offer something of a benefit to you. This means that you get these insane meta of weapon stats and comparisons, the best gun, etc, etc, instead of the more straightforward hardcore damage model that you see in something like Squad. It also means you can end up in terrible situations like we had with Battlefield Hardline. People rush through in the early stages, they get the best gun, and then they're just reaping everybody else, because by just going up through that progression system, that top gun ends up being just absurd compared to others and can end up giving people a disproportionate advantage. Having a standard progression system just unlocking with kill stats and other data and XP, that's one thing, but unlock assignments is another. And this really does break gameplay, as people just find themselves doing stupid crap which makes them ignore what they're actually there to do. And this is something that people have been saying is a terrible thing, but we still see it cropping up in games. Another point to mention in relation to this is that FPS games of the past, even with a progression system, be it COD or Battlefield or something else, there usually were not so many weapons to unlock. So you generally could unlock them all pretty quickly, and then that was that. So there wasn't this need maybe to sort of make them feel so different in terms of damage done. They had certain characteristics, but when you have less weapons, it's easier to spread some characteristics like a faster fire rate or just a little bit more damage, because you're not having to kind of spread it so thinly across this huge amount of weapons. It makes more sense. But now it's just this never-ending grind to get all the weapons and then all the DLC on top. In Squad, you just got your gear. You're done. So this is what it's really coming down to. AAA shooters have so much glitz and glitter now in them through crates, DLC unlocks, achievements, and Christ knows what else. You wonder if they remember that they're trying to make a game which is about two sides battling it out. What is it they say? Keep it simple, stupid? Squad is a game that is excellently simple. The core game creates a solid, clear system that enables players to take those tools and then push them with dynamic and intense gameplay. But those AAA shooters, what I hear from most people these days is they just get bored very quickly, despite all the shiny things. And it's for one simple reason. Games are about the gameplay, and you can dress it up all you like, but when the actual core gameplay is suffering, just doubling down on adding more and more crap and more shiny marketing doesn't actually do anything for your actual gameplay experience. It's just window dressing. It's the experience that people want, and that's what makes them keep coming back to a game, and that's why you see these big AAA titles hemorrhaging their player bases, and as opposed to smaller titles which build up a player base and keep gaining momentum. That fundamental concept is what so many AAA games seem to be lacking, and why so many people are really excited for the smaller team FPS offerings that are coming up this year, because they're not scared and they're not worried, and they don't have like somebody sitting on their shoulder telling them about their bottom line and what their money they're going to make and what they're going to sell through crates and Christ knows what else. They don't worry about that. They're worried about what kind of gameplay they're giving that player, and that gameplay is making people come to the game and go, these guys understand what's going on, these guys get me. So that's my thoughts on this, guys. That's our topic for this week. Tell me what you think about this down below. So now we come to part 2 of Below the Line, where we're discussing the topic from last week, which was Subnautica Early Access. And is early access just generally a good concept? We've seen many games now go through early access, and Subnautica was one which, yes, people have enjoyed, but it still couldn't help but feel like it's just not quite there yet. That's really where we're getting at. And it's true that many games nowadays do seem to go down this path of getting it to a point where they feel like they can push it out and then just thinking, well, we can update it later down the line. But when you've gone through a process of early access, the very nature of early access is to be able to continue to develop it. And when you get to a point of finishing to put it out there and say, we have completed our project, then it's done. So people saying, well, you know, you get it out to a finished state and then you can continue improving and developing it. Well, that is what early access is. That's what early access is for. When other games work on their projects, what they do is they work outside, you know, they work in an enclosed environment, then they release the game, they maybe have a beta period just to test it out, then they release the game, and then if there are any critical errors, yeah, they can fix it, they can tinker around with it, make some little updates. But early access, when you've been producing a game for like 4 years, the whole process of that is to develop it in a way that when you get to a finished state, it should be pretty finished. That's what RimWorld is doing. RimWorld has been going through and improving the game constantly through its early access period, and now RimWorld is coming up to a finished state, and when it's at a finished state, that's when you walk away with an early access game. You don't then continue to fix it. That's the idea of early access. You fix it first, release it, and then you're done. That's how it works. So this concept that like, hey, yeah, they've put it out there, but they're going to continue to just blah, blah, blah. Plus there's fundamental issues with it in terms of like the graphical settings and so on. We managed to make some little tweaks this week, which you're seeing right here, where we discovered that actually there's another setting which doesn't appear in-game, if you can believe it. You can only set it in the main menu outside of the game. So once you've loaded up, there's a graphical setting where you can choose the level of detail, which doesn't appear in-game. You can only do that main menu, and that actually does help with the rendering distance of the objects. So Rob comes in to say, though early access seems like a good idea and a noble concept, I think overall it's bad. Yes, it is a means for small devs to acquire funds and then develop a game that might not otherwise even have been started, but I don't like it because it puts all the risk on the consumer. It turns gamers into a form of venture capitalists. If the early access does poorly, the devs can just move on to something else. If sales are average or better, then they can have their jobs and they can keep developing. Whether they end up finishing or building just a piece of crap game seems inconsequential. Plus, it also feels like one of those terms that gaming industry marketing people come up with, like microtransactions, to manipulate you instead of using something like a paid alpha or paid beta. I'm sure there have been plenty of success stories, which is true, but I wonder how Subnautica would look today if the devs had to assume some risk because otherwise they wouldn't get paid. Look, here's the thing. Basically, it comes down to, like many things, how cynical do you want to be? How much, because you can look at it two ways. You can look at it more positively or more negatively. You can look at it as early access is a fantastic opportunity because it gives creative people an opportunity to make a game which otherwise wouldn't get made, or you can look at it cynically, whereby people are basically just kind of using your money to produce something, and then, hey, if it doesn't work out, whatever, we just do something else, you know? So it's, you just got to kind of try and feel it out. You got to gauge it and just see where it's going to. But that's the thing, is like, if they've genuinely tried their best and this is what they've done and the majority of people are happy with it, well then I guess it's a success. Bojan says, does it even matter? If they keep patching the game, it's better if they erase that early access tag forever. Keep in mind that PUBG also released, but it's still the same broken game it was a week ago before the 1.0 patch. It's worth remembering that early access is something that Steam came up with as a way for people to basically put out there and sell content, which was essentially unfinished content. But here's the thing, the way I always look at it is, once it's purchasable, once you can actually buy it with money, it's open to criticism. So when it's in a closed state, a closed alpha, closed beta, or even an open beta, but it's still not purchasable, you're actually not getting, you're not giving any money. You can give an opinion on how you like the game, but I don't feel like it's particularly fair to be overtly critical at that stage, because at no point at that time have they asked people to stump up money. Now, if they're taking, say, pre-orders or taking DLCs, in that case I would say yes, it's fine to give criticism. Receiving the product. That's really where I would draw the line for when you can give criticism. And I would even say, like, to a point you could give a grace period of like a week or so, once the game has been released, to just tinker around with it. But past that point, I think then you're open to criticism. But it's different with an early access, because an early access is essentially the game is ongoing, so it's like, and again, it's a kind of open-ended. That's really the point of it. With most games, it's released, it's out there, they might make some changes and then it's done. But with an early access, it's open-ended and it's just an ongoing thing. And you don't know how long that's really going to be. Once they have taken your money right there, it does feel okay to criticize it, because basically they've got your money. That's where you have to draw a line of differentiation, I think. And that's the thing with Subnautica, is it was like an ongoing game, the same as RimWorld, it's an ongoing game. It's different with something like, say, Postscriptum, where, yeah, they did a Kickstarter for it, or Hell Let Loose did a Kickstarter for it, but it's in a closed state. People are not kind of actively playing the game. Now, when they put that out there, and then it is a playable game, at that point I would say, yeah, knock yourself out, go mad with criticism. But not until that point. Tom says, I don't really see the problem with Subnautica. Yes, it has the issues that you complained about, but they really don't detract much from the overall game experience. Again, that's totally subjective. It depends on what you like in a game and what bothers you. The render problem can be annoying sometimes, or all the time, but it's maybe for a second or two all the time, and it doesn't detract that much from the immersion. It does. As far as the crashing, I've had zero problems, so that might just be on your end. Yep, again, it's totally subjective, depends on a different person's experience. Your videos seem to contain a lot more issues than I've ever had experience playing the game, so I think it has a lot more to do with your end. Not true. If you search around and you actually look on a lot of the Steam discussion boards and just Google around in general, you'll find a lot of people who have had very similar issues just ongoing, since release, since the finished state. So it's not on my end. There's a lot of people having those issues. However, this does remind me of something. It reminds me of when Battlefield 4 came out. Remember when Battlefield 4 came out and everybody was having crashing issues all over the place and they're having all sorts of lag and problems like this? I never really had any of those problems with me for Battlefield 4, and I can't tell you why, but it just never was an issue for me, and that was why around the release of Battlefield 4, everyone was losing their mind making videos talking about how terrible it was and a disaster. I never had those issues, you know, and that's one thing, is that if you just physically, just for whatever reason, you don't have those issues, you know, you obviously can't critique and say the same things as other people, and it can be very jarring and strange. And that does seem to be the case with Subnautica, is that some people just seem to be not having any of these problems, and others do. And again, that's kind of a problem because it's a consistency issue there as well, and, you know, it just shows that maybe there hasn't been enough testing done, certain conflicts, whether it's hardware related or whatever. But, you know, that is a thing still. Proximal says, I agree, there's technical problems still with Subnautica, and after all this time, they should have been fixed, although I don't find that many are game-breaking. With that said, as someone who's played this game since its very early development, they've done a good job overall, especially content-wise, adding a solid story and new biomes and crafting. It's a lot more than what most early access games achieve at the end of it. Whether or not it could have been achieved sooner is perhaps another question. Tomplay says, hey LT, first comment, I ended up buying the early access on the Xbone as I've been loving the videos that I had seen. Love the game, but dear God, if the draw distance on PC triggers you, do not even look at this version. It is so bad. There's a genuine risk of getting trapped in scenery that hasn't been drawn yet. Does this sound like a finished game to you if you move forward too quickly? I found myself waiting whenever I enter a new area to let the assets draw just in case. Not game breaking for me, but totally screws the immersion. Mind you, 20 plus hours in for 15 quid, I didn't expect it to be polished. I don't know, you should. I mean, indie games for around that money usually are in a good state, so you kind of should expect it to be finished, especially when it's being kind of touted and released as kind of finished. So, you know, you should expect what it says it's going to be. He says, I like the fact that us console scrubs can play these kind of games, but I totally recognize the pitfalls. But this is an issue. People have this idea that just because something gets pushed out onto the console from a PC release that it's automatically going to be less of a game. Really shouldn't be the case. You know, if you're releasing a product, it shouldn't just be like an afterthought, like, oh yeah, we pushed that out there and it's just going to be some extra revenue. If you're putting content out there for your user base, for your consumer, it's got to be subject to the same quality standards because it's still a product you're selling. So, you know, again, if it's so significantly worse on console, to me, I would be asking for my money back. I just don't think that's acceptable. With the ShortOnCaptor says, I like below the line, early access, and 1.0. Seriously though, early access should be for a limited time. Devs are abusing a concept meant as a teaser or a testing phase as a method to allow them to drag development out forever. I think this really hits the nail on the head because I think this is what happened with Subnautica. I think that the game is still not really where they probably wanted it to be at, but after such a long time, they kind of felt like, oh crap, we've got to kind of put it out there, we've got to, you know, just ship it, you know? I do think that this is kind of how people ride that early access train, where they're just like, well, you know, it doesn't really matter because we're still in early access, so we can get away with not having done this and not having done that and not got this working and blah, blah, blah. We'll do it later, don't worry about it. But once you say like, oh, my game is out there and it's released, like I said before, you kind of open yourselves up to, well, you are a finished game and why is this not working? It's a different thing. Whereas with early access, people are much more likely to cut you some slack. And I think maybe, yeah, there should be some harsher timeframes imposed. But again, also with these kind of ongoing developments, you do end up coming back to how long is a piece of string, because at the end of the day, the developer can turn around and be like, oh, we had some unforeseen situation happen and, you know, we had to just extend our deadline because, you know, there's no kind of ultimate deadline for an early access game because nobody's basically going to smack you on the wrist if it doesn't get done. There's no penalties there, there's no shareholders maybe sitting over you worrying about it because often it's indie games, you know? So that's the thing, it's a totally different ball game. Okay, last up then, Orange, who says, regarding early access, my thoughts are split. I do believe it's a good development format in the way that active feedback and bug reports are made early in development. From a developer's perspective, the sooner you get knowledge of bugs and technical issues, the better it is. Additionally, this could lead to the identification of design-related issues. Once fixed early on, it could minimize issues with a full release, say bad balancing or server infrastructure. If you put aside the potential technical and design benefits from EA, the early project income could benefit the development as well. It's not more than the truth that development costs money and time, while the quantity in question differs from project to project dependent on the overall project scope. Currency and time need to be invested in the project, and therefore an early flow of these necessities could improve and affect the final product. The final thing regarding positive aspects, the developers are able to convey new thoughts and ideas, and people are able to experience these coming alive. Piece by piece, gamers can see how the final product is forming, and this can be immensely engaging. A parable can be the commitment to your favourite sports team. My point is that the customer engagement can be grown over a longer time, which can establish then a solid player base early on. That's a really good point to make too. In regards to what is bad, in my opinion, with EA, it mostly boils down to the fact that it needs trust. In relation to the reasoning, all of this relies on trust. Gamers need to trust the developers that they're going to be dealing with, the issues, listening to feedback, commitment to the project. The same goes for the financial side of things. Buying into an EA game, you're placing trust in the developers, and when given this trust, developers need to truthfully answer it, meaning that money placed in the project needs to contribute to furthering the project development. If misused, people are going to be fooled for the sake of developers' greed. While this doesn't only hurt the relationship between the specific developer and their community, people will have a tendency to generalize. So consequently, gamers might be more reluctant to buy then early access titles that could be potentially perfectly good games when they're finished or under development. As with most things money related, once people catch the scent of easy money, some people are always going to come in there and try and abuse that. But aside from the fraud risks, EA games could also land in development. Hell, the concept and idea might sound amazing, and the developers are going to be really motivated, and the hype is going to be really real. And then bam, everything just dies. The concept idea showed to be just too much of a challenge, and the scope is just expanding. At some point, the frame that encloses everything can just burst, and the main culprit often being overhyped development. Be that it fueled by consumer hype as well. I go so far as to say that hype is really what can create a project, but just as easily kill it. And that's probably about as good a point for me to finish on as any, which is that hype is bullshit, because it's one of my favourite things to harp on about. Whether it's from a consumer and you guys, gamers themselves, or whether it's from developers, hype in general serves no real purpose other than to just give people unrealistic expectations, hype themselves up, and just set themselves up for disappointment. If you keep your feet on the ground and you just stay objective about things, you're far more likely to have an enjoyable experience, because when you come to that game, you don't have these grandiose expectations of what it is you're going to get out of it. I think that's one of the biggest dangers with early access, is that people's imagination just runs away with them. They get so overawed by the concept, and they think like, what if, and they sort of forget the physical and literal limitations of maybe, trying to produce a game on a budget, and at the same time working in a small team, and the limitations of working in a small team. You can only do so much. There's only physically so much you can do within a certain amount of time, and that's why some concepts to add into games are really cool. Ideas are really cool, like big ideas. Hey, we could do this, we could do that. Wouldn't it be great if we could do this? All of those things probably would be feasible given enough money, given enough time, given enough people working on the project. But it's all about just scaling back your expectations. And I think that's often where, you have to draw the line. Thanks for watching this week, guys. Hope you enjoyed very much. Tell me your thoughts down below about squad AAA titles, what they're doing right with FPS and not. I'll see you next week for some more Below the Line.